Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Change. My name is Debbie, for those just joining us for the first time, and I am here to answer your questions around organizational change management. So today's question is a good one. It revolves around how much change is too much change, right? Just acknowledging that their organization is transforming how everyone works. Right now, everyone is working from home, at least for the last few months, and meaning they're trying to stay productive while they're learning new technology. There's structural changes that are being made. Operationally, things are changing. Not to mention how much is changing in our personal lives, right? Needing to work from home and homeschool your children. And there's just so much change. And they wanted just insights into, is there really a such thing as too much change? And how do we manage all of this change that's happening at the same time? So let's take a look. So I always like to talk about a change threshold. And really, that's a point in time where each one of us reaches a point where we just can't take it anymore, right? Everyone can adapt to change to some degree, but we all relate to change and relate to how much change we can handle at varying degrees. So it's going to be really important to understand your organization's change threshold and how much change your organization is used to and can adapt. And a lot of that stems from your organizational culture and what you put out there as far as your vision and your mission and how progressive your company is. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and usually then that draws the talent out from the market when you're hiring for new positions that are in alignment with that type of environment. So it's really important to understand your organization's change threshold. Each user obviously will have their own change threshold as well. You'll probably have a lot of early adopters, people who just jump on any new technology or process changes. It's all good to them. You'll also have the opposite ends of the spectrum of people who push back, those laggards, people who, don't like to change. If it's not broken, don't fix it type of mentality. But it's really important to understand that. And you can do surveys and focus groups and things like that within your organization to really understand, where do you think that change threshold is? Is it 3 changes or 5 changes or 10 changes? How much has to be changing at some point in time before you start feeling that pushback? Sometimes it's just one change, right? But it's, how much can your organization deal with at once? So if we take a look at this and kind of do a double click and start diving into the concept of change, really what we know for sure is that change is required. It's required for us to grow as human beings. It's required for organizations to not only survive but thrive, especially in today's world. So whether it's, technology innovations or digital transformation, modern workplace, different ways of working, business processes, all of that requires some sort of change in your organization. And that's okay, right? Think about it, if we didn't change and we didn't grow, we'd all be 40-year-old crawling around in diapers, right? So we know you have to change, right? It's what drives you to talk and walk and, grow as a human being. And we know the same type of change is required at an organizational level as well. But we also know, while some change can be really exciting, right? Like learning how to walk for the first time, usually as you get older, you like that stability. You like just that, comfort of knowing what you're doing and what's coming next. And when too much change is thrown at you, it really brings about all of this fear and anxiety. And that's what causes a lot of that pushback. I have organizations tell me all the time they feel like users are just difficult and they don't like to change, so they push back. And part of that is, right, that change threshold. It's your change culture, and it's also how much change you're throwing at your users all at once. So just know, I mean, it's just we're human beings, we're emotional beings, and sometimes too much change can actually breed some of that fear and anxiety, which results in the pushback. So one of the ways that you can counteract that, and this takes a little bit of a learning curve, it's really to get to a state of dynamic stability. Now, if you've never heard that term before, the best way to describe it is kind of like riding a bicycle, right? Think about it. If you were to just stand still on your bicycle and try to balance on two pedals, you'll notice you're not very stable, right? You're kind of wobbling back and forth, just trying to maintain your balance. But the more you start pedaling and the faster you start going, you're actually more balanced, right? It feels safer. It feels better when you're moving forward. So it's dynamic stability is this, it's this way of becoming more stable, becoming more comfortable as you're moving yourself forward. And that's a state that every organization really has to get to these days because there's so much change going on in the world. You can't afford to stand still, right? You're forced to make these changes and forced to progress and transform and innovate. And it's really the new normal. That is the new normal. People say they can't wait to go back to normal. You know what? Dynamic stability is the new normal. It's being willing to be flexible and adaptable and adjusting as you need to, all while moving yourself forward. So that is a way, and it'll take some time for organizations to really get there. But really what that means when you think about getting to a state of dynamic stability and getting to a state where you know your organization's change culture needs to shift and go from a state of fear or anxiety to excitement or acceptance, how you think about implementing change is really going to influence how successful you are. It's going to accelerate your results or it's going to impede your results when dealing with change. So let's take a look at some tips and some things that you can do as you're moving your organization forward with all of these changes that might be happening. All right, the first thing I always like to call out is, we've all seen those bundle deals, right? You get your internet and your home phone and your cable like all together and you get this great bundle deal. When it comes to change, sometimes bundling things is not really the best way to go. And I've seen this happen. This is probably one of the biggest barriers to change that I've seen in organizations where they think they're doing a good thing because they're bundling all of these changes and they think, well, users just have to change once. But really what they're changing, they're saying, well, we're going to upgrade our operating system and we're going to launch Office 365 and we're going to launch this new collaboration technology and we're going to switch out our phone system and everyone has to work from home and everyone has to homeschool their kids, and there's so much change and they're trying to do it at once. And that's where people reach that change threshold and why they start pulling back. So you really have to be thinking about how much change is too much change and can you space it out a little bit? Can you think of creative ways and bundle the changes that make sense with one another versus just pulling it all together? And I completely appreciate that from an operational and cost perspective, it may make more sense to bundle together because you only have one project team that manages six changes at once, but you have to think about what's really in it for the end user, because what organizations expect is that all of your users immediately accept and adapt and adopt all of these changes while still maintaining productivity. And nowadays, people are already working 40, 60, 80 hours a week just trying to maintain their productivity. And now you're throwing all of this change on top of them. You have to recognize that implementing changes is going to detract from productivity because users now need to take time away to learn a different process, to learn a different way of working, to learn a new technology. So you really have to balance that. And if you're trying to change 3, 5, 7 things at once, that's really going to start impacting the productivity. So you have to be mindful of that and set the right expectations, right? I've had organizations that roll out new technology and expect within 30 days everyone's not only going to adopt it, but their productivity is going to increase tenfold. And that's just not realistic. So you really have to understand those implications. It's also important to understand, and I talked about this on a prior slide, everyone in your organization is going to adapt and adopt change very differently, right? You have people that will pick up new processes and they just go with the flow. You have other people who like the way that they've worked for the last 20 years and see no reason to change. They simply just want to get their job done and go home at the end of the day. So when you're thinking about implementing a change strategy, and I think of a change strategy as user readiness, which is about awareness, training, support, all these different aspects, you really have to accommodate different learning styles and different support styles to really help users over that threshold so that they feel comfortable making the change. So just know it's not a one size fits all. It's not sending an email with a link to training. It's really about understanding who your users are and what will resonate most with them to help make the change. And it's also important to note, this kind of goes to that first bullet point, to really create sticky results, meaning that they're sustained and you're really seeing that ROI from whatever change you're implementing. Results are going to take time. I always like to use analogies, and this is the one where I always talk about a fad diet, right? People expect these massive results right away when making a change, and it's kind of like a fad diet where you expect, I'm going to lose, 50 pounds in 1 month, and you make these drastic changes, but then what happens in month 2, 3, and 4? Right? It becomes not sustainable and you end up gaining all that weight back, probably, and then some, right? So if you really want to create those results that are going to last over time, build out your plan for sustainability to know that, instead of seeing, 50 times the results in month 1, maybe it's only 5. And then in month 2, it's another 10 times results or 10% results. And you're building up. That's what's going to maintain that momentum. And I know it's hard and it's challenging because organizations just want to see those results and move on to the next thing. But we are creatures of habit. As human beings, it takes us time to accept and adapt and adopt new ways of working. So you really have to be mindful of that and build that into your plan. And one way to do this is to create the perception of minimal changes. This is one of the favorite things I've loved to do when I work with organizations. So let's say, for example, that you have, 5 big things that are going to be changing in your organization. Maybe it's an operational process or a technology process. Instead of pushing each individual change to a user and say, we're changing this, we're changing that, we're changing this other thing, create a vision for your users. And let me give you an example of what I mean by this. So I worked with an organization not too long ago, and they were changing their operating system, and they were changing their communication technology and their phone system and their headsets. Like, they were changing a lot within a short period of time. And they knew that if they just started telling users that they were going to change all of these different things, users would be freaking out. They would reach their change threshold. So instead, what they did, they created a vision, and their vision was called Innovate 2020. And they went to their users and they said, by the year 2020, so that they did this last year. I know it's already, well into 2020, but they did this last year, and they said, by the year 2020, we want to gain market share. We want our stock price to double. We want to be the best in breed in our industry. And so they really sold the users on the vision for where they wanted to take the company. And then they said, but we are all in this together, and we have to work together. We have to support one another. Are you in it? Like, because we can't reach our vision. We can't reach this big goal that we have for our organization if every single one of us doesn't do our part. So everyone was super excited, right? They weren't freaking out that they had to change something. They said, wow, this is fantastic. We're going to double in size. I'll have lots of great opportunities. I want to see our company succeed. And then they said, in order for us to get there, right? Obviously, we can't stay business as usual because we'll have results as usual. So they said, we're going to have to make some changes over the coming year. And they said, we understand change is hard, but we're here to support you. But by then, users were already bought into it because users were sold on this big vision of where they wanted to take the company. So over the course of the year, as they rolled out more changes, users didn't see it as, oh, here's this one change, and oh my gosh, here's this other change, and oh my gosh, here's yet another change. They saw it as, this is just part of this bigger vision. It's part of us being able to realize the vision. And throughout the year, the organization kept the users informed. They said, hey, great, we're 50% towards our goal. Look at how far we've come. You guys are all doing such a great job, right? They made sure that users felt like they were part of the conversation. And that really created the perception of, we're working towards something really positive versus, oh my gosh, we have all of these different changes going on. So that's where you create that perception of minimizing what's actually changing and maximizing the end result. And that is one of the keys to driving successful change, especially when you have a lot of changes going on in your organization. And one way that you can do this, because as I talked about earlier, remember, organizations a lot of the time want to see all these really big goals really fast. And we talked about how that's not always realistic. So I say, you know what, set those long-term goals like that organization did, right? 12 months from now, this is where we want to be. But what they did is they also set short-term milestones. So they were able to say, in 1 month, in 3 months, in 6 months, here's where we want to be. So they were able to track their milestones and celebrate those milestones to show progress, versus simply saying, oh my gosh, we have to wait 12 months to track anything. And then they didn't think they were successful because it took 12 months. But when you start seeing all of the different momentum that's being gained by those short-term milestones, you're much more likely to retain that excitement, sustain those goals, and create that stickiness that we talked about earlier. And what you really want to do is build trust with your users. And one way to do that is exactly the example I shared earlier of sharing your vision, bringing users along on the journey, making them feel like they are part of the conversation, being empathetic. Hey, we know that change is really hard. We're here to support you. We're in this together. We're better together. Any way that you can build that trust, users are much less likely to push back, because they feel like you're counting on them. You're counting on them to be successful, versus a user feeling like, hey, you're changing something and you have to do it because we told you so, right? It's all about the message. It's all about perception. So think about that as some ways to really help accelerate the change, especially when you have a lot of change happening. I love the idea of creating a vision, and I encourage every customer to do that when they're driving change. And that's where you can get really creative in bringing that message home to your users. All right, so what tips do you have when your organization deals with a lot of change at once? What are some of the tactics that you've done that have worked really well? Or maybe what are some of the tactics that didn't go over so well that you wanted to share so that we can all learn from one another? Make sure you're adding those to the comments below and share your insights and experiences with us. If you have questions that you'd like me to consider for an upcoming video, feel free to submit those at aka.my/question. And with that, we are wrapping up another episode of Let's Talk Change. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.